And we're back.
Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Sam saw a funny vine.
Saw a funny vine of Robin Williams saying Neon Genesis Evangelion. What are we doing here?
I don't remember. So, hey, everybody, we lost an episode.
Yeah, that's important to mention.
We made it to the PlayStation land, and I don't think you're going to see how we got here. Not that it really matters.
I mean, you could speed up the footage, right?
The footage is there. I'm going to include that. You've probably already seen that. I think I probably did a little funny thing with it, but Sam has not seen because I have not done it yet.
Yeah.
So that's a weird kind of twist in the universe. You know, it's like I'm talking about a thing that you've already seen, but I have not made yet.
Yeah, at the time of recording, it hasn't been created. This is Chian's company.
Who is Chion?
There you ladies are. It's nothing lavish,
I know.
It's just
I've completely dropped off. We're looking for key fragments, aren't we? Like, what is this? Also, are we gonna see what Chion looks like? Because,
no, I think it's just the silhouette because the artist didn't have enough time.
I mean, you don't need to make character animation if it's just a silhouette.
That's true. They don't have to make them heaving and bouncing.
Yeah.
And tween-mouthing.
Tween-mouthing and stretching around the chest. This is a weird game, Travis.
Yeah, they put priorities in all the wrong places.
So, you mentioned in the deleted episode that we lost the audio for, you wanted to talk about another show.
Actually, it was in the Suikoden episode. I said I had two things I wanted to talk about.
Right, but I think you talked about it in the deleted episode.
No, I don't think I mentioned it.
Well, then, I'm ready to hear it for the first time.
So, I've been in the habit recently of kind of watching older TV. And part of the reason is because I find today's TV really, very strong production values. You know, all of the writing and everything is so stronger now than it's ever been. But in a way, because there's so much competition, I feel like all of the shows I've been seeing are a little bit more manipulative than I'm kind of comfortable with. You know, like every show on TV that is dramatic, that's not a comedy show, it will end every episode with some major conflict that's not being resolved, it's like a string of things.
It's very serialized.
Yeah.
It very much is trying to get you, encourage you to
keep watching, or to keep your HBO subscription or whatever.
Yeah.
And I kind of got a little sick of being strung along and never having kind of ends to, because in older TV when it was episodic, when things were kind of contained in their episodes, you got a complete story every time, you know, and at the end of the episode, whatever was the issue is over and there's nothing left to worry about. You just watch it because the show is enjoyable.
This game just did it again, where it loaded up one picture of Neptune and then stopped and put up a different one. So
I'll look over the footage and
you'll see.
Confirm.
Yeah, in fact, actually, what they used to do a lot more frequently was they would have major arcs and minor arcs, and so in Twin Peaks, I know this happened all the time, where there was things that strung you together to the next episode, but within the episode there were little occurrences between maybe less important characters that you would see the end of, the beginning, middle, and end of.
And I don't think it's necessarily a recent phenomenon. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I saw a bunch of the original Lost in Space TV series, and that show was even more manipulative than shows today, because that was back in the era of we need you to sit down and watch this at a certain time, and the way that they would get you to do that is they would basically, everything would be at a slant. So it would, if you started an episode, it would be the last half of last week's episode, and then the second half would be the first half of the next episode.
Weird.
So it would be half of the episode is the end to last week's story, and then the next half is the first half of the next.
They basically cut the episode in the middle.
Yeah.
They made all the episodes and cut them in the middle so that you would be strung along to see the next one.
Yeah, basically. It was very bizarre.
You were rewarded for coming back, but also we introduced you to a new conflict to
get you to come back next week.
Time.
Yeah. And watching it on DVD is funny, because it's I got him. I don't need to be sold. And I think that now that we're in the age of Netflix and stuff, I almost feel like that kind of thing is outdated. We don't really need that anymore, because people aren't tuning in at a specific time. I mean,
there still are. So the one example I can think of that's current right now that even though it's mostly like I don't know anybody who actually watches it on TV. They watch it through direct like a on-demand service.
Yeah.
Game of Thrones does that.
Oh,
right?
sure. And
They
that's
string
one
it
of the
along.
things I started to get sick of. Because I watched like the first season and a half of Game of Thrones, and I realized it just was not doing it for me. I thought it was really well made. I have a lot of respect for that show as far as like a well-crafted thing, but I didn't like it very much. And
I'm gonna apologize, by the way, everybody. I'm going through all these little like
just to get through
explore things to get through them. So like if the gameplay is not engaging, it's because the game is not engaging.
which ultimately reflects badly on us because we are the ones who chose the game.
Yeah, I'm just gonna.
Anyway, the topic for today
Yeah.
that I wanted to bring up is one of the shows I've been watching. I've been watching a lot of Star Trek. I've been watching a lot of X-Files, and then I also my uncle knows I was in Japan for a while, and he decided to give me a series on DVD that he had from 1980 called Shogun, which is a miniseries, sort of in the same vein of a lot of like BBC shows where they're like 2-hour-long episodes, and there are 5 of them, and it's basically just this 10-hour narrative strung out in these movie-length episodes, basically. And this was back when I think we did that a lot more in the U.S. I don't think the U.S. TV networks do that today.
Not really.
They bring in like British shows that do that, but they don't make their own. And this is a show about basically, I think it's, I guess it's Sengoku Jidai. It's the feudal era. It's 1600, so it's a little early. It's basically the story, the conflict between, Hideyoshi and Tokugawa, and the unification of Japan under the Tokugawa shogunate. And it basically it is a fictionalization of that conflict. They replace everybody's names, so it's all kind of they give themselves a little bit more creative liberty to kind of do what they want with the story, but they still kind of present it in a very historically accurate way, I would say. And what was very interesting to me is that the show is like, considering when it came out and considering like what people thought of Japan back then, it's like incredibly accurate.
Really?
It's
American made, you said?
It is American made. The show is about this British guy who is like a pirate, and basically like washes ashore and is captured and has to kind of get in bed with the Tokugawa side, who they call Torunaga. But it's funny because half the show is practically like just people speaking in Japanese, and there are no subtitles.
Really?
Because I was reading about it, and I think the director said something like, if he can't understand it, you can't understand it.
Huh.
And which is, I think, a really cool idea.
Yeah, it's kind of clever.
Yeah,
And as someone who speaks a little bit of Japanese, do you understand some of what they're saying? Or?
Yeah, and that's actually funny because there are definitely parts of it that I just understand, and I forget that I'm not supposed to be able to understand it. And it's pretty funny because there are little jokes that they hide in there for people who speak Japanese.
Oh, yeah?
Like, at the very beginning, this British guy he wakes up and he's in someone's house, and there's like a lady taking care of him, and he's like trying to tell him what his name is. He's like, I'm Jim. Jim. And then he like points to her and he's like, what's your name? And she's like, oh, Onna. And he's like, oh, your name is Onna. And he never gets corrected.
That's not.
And I'm like, oh.
That's not the name.
And if you know, that means woman, basically. And it's
That's
interesting.
pretty good. I like that.
Yeah, there's little jokes like that in there. And it's funny because
I think I just walked into the dungeon that's like to get between land masses.
basically where oh man, look at all the islands. There's so many.
Challenge dungeon ghost mine. Okay, so it's the challenge cave, whatever. This is. I thought this was just like I'm confused as to where to go.
The story kind of goes in a direction that at first I was like kind of disappointed by it, because at first I was like, okay, this is gonna be a big conflict, like this big, Battle of Sekigahara conflict from the perspective of this Western guy who's lost in Japan, basically. And I was like, there's 2 ways they could do this. There's either the way that they have him just be this bumbling guy who just sees it, or they somehow
Make
come
him
up
the
with
hero.
make him a hero, and that's what they end up doing. He becomes a samurai.
Okay.
Spoiler. Well, that's like halfway through. It's not really that big of a deal. The spoiler is, I mean, it's historical stuff. Like the real big deals are the political things that are going on between all the factions. Because there's also this whole deal of like the Portuguese. Because at the time, the British and the Portuguese were at war, and so they consider themselves enemies. And the Portuguese at the time were like the only ones allowed to trade with Japan. And they're Jesuits, and the British are Anglicans, and there's a bunch of conflicts about that. And basically, at one point, the British guy kind of starts to get really ingrained into Japanese culture, and he starts to like, because at first he's stuck there, he hates it, he wants to leave.
Yeah.
And eventually he starts to really just prefer being there. And there's a funny scene where he encounters his he gets separated from his crew, and he meets them again in like the 3rd episode. And they're just like, they've been locked away in this like house, and they're not allowed to leave by the shogunate basically. And and they're fine, but they're all like, just this house is just like meat hanging from the ceiling and like gross, and it's just disgusting. And he leaves, and he's like, he tells his like his escorts like, "Ofuro now." Like, because he was so grossed out by how disgusting the Europeans were that but the show is just, it's really compelling. But I was disappointed because I was like, oh, they took it in that kind of Last Samurai direction of like, oh,
I was just about to bring up Last Samurai.
The European is so good that he becomes a samurai within like a couple months, whereas everybody else, like, it's their whole
Their
like strict
lives.
way of life. And then I was like, this is disappointing. And I did a little research. He's a real person.
Okay.
So in the show, they call him Anjin, which means pilot. And I was like, okay, this is just some, they shoehorned in a guy to like give it a Western's perspective so that we could.
But this is actually historical.
There was
fiction.
a man whose name was, I think, like William Adams, who was a pirate, like a British pirate, crashed in Japan, became the personal advisor to Tokugawa, and was the one of the only and first European samurai.
Whoa. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I was like, wait a minute, this show is actually like about what this guy actually existed. Like, the Last Samurai is real. And I don't know, it made the show like way more interesting to know that like this is a real thing that happened. And ultimately, I mean, the history shows that the Portuguese eventually were kicked out, and then the Dutch became the primary trade partner, and they were allied with the British, and that's sort of, he was responsible for that. You can go to Nagasaki today and see his grave.
Wow.
And it says, like, his name was, I think, like...
So would Japanese people, if they watch the show, like, be able to see and recognize, like this is stuff that happened? Or?
Again, it's fictionalized stuff, so the names are different, so that might be part of an issue for some of them, but just like knowing who's who, because Torunaga is who they call Tokugawa, and that's confusing because when I heard Torunaga, I thought that he was Nobunaga.
Yeah.
Like, that was a weird choice, because it's closer to Nobunaga than Tokugawa.
Yeah.
And, you know, because they did that, they didn't have to have a strict... The little conflicts and the little intricacies of the politics are kind of more open to interpretation because of that. And so I don't think all of that was as strictly historically accurate. Like, all of the little daimyos and things are a little bit more probably looser. Just built for the sake of building conflict and stuff like that. And my only complaint is that while they don't show anything that is specifically wrong, they do highlight things in a way to shock you. So in the first episode, they do this thing where where he crash lands and to sort of illustrate how different Japan is from what he's used to. He lands. There's all of these Japanese people who try and help him get up, and then like the leader of the village, the local samurai guy, comes out and everybody bows to him, and then one old man like forgets to bow and he chops his head off.
Whoa.
And it's like.
That's the Japan I know.
And that's like within the first 20 minutes or so, and it's like, okay, you did that just to illustrate a point. Like, and that would have happened, you know, if you refused to bow to a samurai, he would have cut your head off, but you know, to do that in the first 20 minutes is to entice the audience, not to be like, this is what Japan is like, you know, and there's a little bit more of that, and eventually it gets better as you get kind of used to it with this guy, and maybe that's sort of the point, is that if you don't know what Japan is, because again, this came out in 1980.
Kampa just died.
Oh no. Kampa, no. She died to the weeping grass.
I'm worried that
Did we save?
Oh, we did. We're fine. I'm gonna leave this dungeon, but like these guys are really tough.
Yeah, maybe we should.
They're gonna cut my head off.
Why aren't you healing?
Well, I can't. It's not something I can opt into. It's something that happens automatically.
Why isn't she healing?
It's a great question.
Why didn't Kampa heal?
Are
you out of the reflexes?
That's a great question. No, we got plenty of reflexes.
Tough mill.
All right, let's get out of here.
But it was, you know, 1980, I don't think a lot of people knew a whole lot about Japan back then. And it's kind of interesting timing, because that was about when Japan was starting to become like a global economic power. And I think a lot of people in the U.S. were really like kind of afraid of Japan because they thought they were going to take us over. They were buying a lot of American companies at the time. Like that was when Sony bought Columbia.
How do I run away?
You need to have the eject button. So you used your eject button to leave, and now you don't have one anymore. Well, you're almost at the exit.
I hope I don't run into anything else.
And it was also closer to World War II, so I think people had a lot of
still
like
fresher in people's minds.
So people still had a lot of like either negative or wrong or ignorant ideas about what Japan was, and for this show to come out and be so not pro-Japan, but see Japan as like equal level of these are humans and their conflicts are interesting too.
Well,
like,
you'll remember in the 90s there was still a big sentiment of kind of othering Japan. Like people were freaked out at the Pokemon takeoff just because they thought like, why do kids like this so much? Like this must be Japanese propaganda.
Yeah, like the South Park episode.
The South Park episode satirizes that, but people really thought that like this was revenge for World War II.
Yeah, so I like that this show takes this very human, like they really show Tokugawa or Toranaga or whatever as this very wise, like clever person who is not just like an emblem of something. He's like an actual character. The only character who I was disappointed by is there's a woman who's sort of his interpreter for the British guy, and they like it's sort of there's a romance plot with that, and she kind of gets lost in all of this kind of mysticism a lot. Like they'll have conversations and she'll be the one to explain to him all of the things about Japan, you know, and that gets a little annoying because it's like when we were taking Japanese in high school, I remember I would ask questions to our teacher about Japan, and he would be like, don't assume like I know everything about Japan.
Yeah,
that's part of the problem. Like one issue that a lot of tourists have when they go to countries is they assume that everybody
knows everything about it.
Yeah, and this kind of perpetuates that of like this woman is able to verbalize every little aspect of what Japanese culture is to this guy, and I'm like, that just seems unrealistic.
It also sounds like, from the way you're describing it, that she would kind of be like a guide for the show, like just
for the audience.
For the audience, yeah. Like that doesn't sound like she's a fully fleshed out character in her own right.
There's also stuff that I think they point out that is probably true of Japan in 1600, but not true of Japan anymore.
Sure.
Like there's a scene where he's taking a bath, and the guide lady comes in to take a bath with him, and she's like, "Oh, well, in Japan, you know, we're not ashamed of our bodies, and we just, you know, you shouldn't worry that I'm naked with you."
Anime has taught me the opposite, Travis. I don't believe that.
And I'm like, yeah, I think if you go to Japan expecting that as like a lesson, I don't think that's true. I think people tend to be very modest.
Guys, you can't walk into the ladies' onsen. Like, you're not allowed in there.
But, you know, maybe in 1600 they didn't care.
Yeah, who knows?
But, you know,
I wonder how much, like, you'd have to do some research, but I wonder how much of it was just kind of fabrication for the sake of making it more enticing for the audience.
Everything that I read about it, there didn't seem to be any backlash from anybody when it came out. And as far as, like, a reputation for inaccuracy, it certainly doesn't have one. So, you know, and my big complaint was kind of squashed by it being about a guy who really existed. Because I thought he was totally there just to like be the guy for me to connect to, you know, and for me to cheer for. And he is, but he's based on a real person who is super interesting. And so, I highly recommend it. It's a very good series. I don't know where you could watch it. I have the DVDs, but
Is it streaming anywhere? Like
I didn't check. But it
how
might
can
be on-
I watch?
It might be on Amazon. I don't know.
Shogun is the name of the.
Yep, just Shogun. It's based on a novel.
Okay. Well, it
very
sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
Just gonna kill
You know
this
what else
stray
is gonna
dog.
be good?
Killing the stray dog.
Yeah. Do you want to just episode to end after you beat him? Because we're at 20.
Wow, 20 went by really quickly.
Yeah.
But I also just stalled off enough time to kill the stray dog. See you tomorrow, everybody.
That wasn't enough to take me.
Goodbye.